This is your World War III update, weekend edition. Here's what's going on. So it's been a relatively slow couple of days as far as polycrisis media events are concerned. However, what that typically means, because we're in World War III, whenever there's no news, that's bad news because that means that big things are percolating. You can only hatch big plans in silence, okay? You can't do that when everything is frenzied and chaotic. That's because things are going on. It's when things aren't going on that big aero attacks are being planned, and that's exactly what's happening. Of course, this is that punctuated escalation that I was talking about. We're going to see these periods of consolidation and rearming, which is what's happening right now with Israel and the United States, who happen to have escalation dominance in the Middle East, so they can press the pause button whenever they want. The Iranians don't have that luxury to go on the initiative. When you're fighting a technologically superior foe in terms of their ability to have air superiority, in the very least, you can't press the pause button. The Israelis had to press the pause button because they ran out of air defense interceptors, but they're going to recommence the war at a time and place of their choosing. It's not in Iran's interest right now to restart the war. Some people might suggest that if you know a punch or if you know a fight is coming, you might as well throw the first punch, as the saying goes, and go on the offensive. However, it appears as though Iran is not in a position having the base level air defense systems in place in order to ensure that they can sustain long-term hostilities and win a long-winded war of attrition against the Israelis and the Americans. So because the Israelis and the Americans have escalation dominance, they can press the pause button. That means that they're planning something big, and all things point towards another major round of escalation between Iran and the Israelis, or AKA the Americans. What you're seeing right now in terms of the perfidious duplicity on social media with Donald Trump and the Ayatollah and Benjamin Netanyahu, and playing all of these games, one day being very dovish, the next day being very hawkish. Basically, what we can derive from that is that we can't derive anything from that, is that we are living truly in the age of postmodern politics, where what's said today has absolutely no bearing whatsoever on what is said tomorrow. Donald Trump can come out singing dovish praises for the Israelis and the Iranians on one day, and the next day can do a complete 180 pivot. And because of the most recent historical precedent that has been set, the perfidious display of trying to befriend the Iranians and coax them and string them along, while all the while getting ready to backstab them and derail the negotiation process, we can expect, and in fact we should almost anticipate, that if they are making dovish advances towards the Iranians to initiate some sort of rapprochement, that we can only expect that they're actually planning a major attack. And that's what I suspect is going on right now. In fact, at the time of making this video, air defense systems are active in numerous parts of Iran. So Iran is still being hit, presumably from either the inside or perhaps neighboring Azerbaijan, by partisan groups who are attempting to disrupt and likely prime the grounds for a future air campaign once again by the Israelis, who are awaiting more air defense systems from the Americans. It has been reported that 15 to 20% of the U.S.'s THAAD interceptors have been exhausted just on the 12-day war with Iran. Now, that is one of the most sophisticated air defense systems in the world, and that we're already 20% in means that if you were to continue this conflict for a sustained period of time, then the Israelis would be fully exposed, and that is why they decided to press the pause button, because they have nuclear weapons. They're not party to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is perfectly ethically acceptable for everybody. For some reason, we are persistently told that the Iranians are the bad people and that they subjugate their women and that we need to go over there and bring liberty and democracy because they want to get a nuclear weapon to come and destroy us. Meanwhile, we are the ones who are escalating the war against Iran, using nuclear weapons as leverage for escalation dominance. That's what's happening. That's the truth. Might makes right. It makes no sense trying to create grievances about it, because nobody's going to listen. We have to just wait and see where the chips fall. And it's ultimately going to come down to who makes the best strategic decisions from here on in. So Iran has removed all UN surveillance cameras from its nuclear sites. The IAEA is warning that monitoring is now severely compromised. They basically kicked out the chief director of the IAEA, Rafael Grossi, who, of course, was providing the Israelis and the Americans with all the intelligence and the blueprints on the nuclear facilities that they then used to attack said nuclear facilities, despite the fact that there was no evidence that they were trying to make nuclear weapons. They were enriching uranium to 60% grade, which is only needed if you are going to pursue nuclear weapons, but they were using that as leverage because, of course, because Trump backed out of the JCPOA, which basically put extremely strangling restrictions on the Iranians. They needed some leverage in those negotiations to ensure that those sanctions could be lifted and they could fully partake in the spoils of global commerce. Unfortunately, that's likely not going to happen because Trump is a patsy of the AIPAC lobby and Benjamin Netanyahu, who he has no problem kissing his ass every single day on X. For some reason, some people seem to think that the tough talk of Trump is actually sincere when it comes to Bibi Netanyahu. It should be abundantly clear at this point that it is not. Trump is a lapdog of the Israeli lobby, and that's basically all there is to it. That's been proven through and through. Yeah, is he going to pretend to raise his voice and drop F-bombs before getting into his helicopter, walking off in an epic fashion? Of course he is. That's what they have to do. He's a great actor, okay? And he's fooled a lot of people into thinking that he is not beholden to a foreign country, which he most certainly is. Now, Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister, has indicated that Parliament voted to halt IAEA collaboration until nuclear security is ensured. Iran is rejecting resuming nuclear talks with the United States. They've reopened a deep tunnel at Esfahan uranium mining site. Now, recall that the IDF said that if you go back to these sites, we will be able to know on satellite, and we are going to start to bomb you again. So Iran is already in breach of that red line that has been set by the Americans and are already trying to dig out the tunnels of these facilities. There, like I said, there's been explosions and air defense systems activated throughout numerous parts of Iran over the last couple days. There are over 1,000 arrests of potential Mossad agents. A lot of Israeli accounts are saying this is really paranoid behavior, right? Extremely paranoid behavior. Well, the reality is that if you go to Israel, you'll notice that there are checkpoints pretty much everywhere. And in addition to that, there are guys carrying around fully automatic rifles and girls everywhere. So I think the Iranians are just finally catching up to the fact that if you want to compete with the West in any meaningful way, you have to have a totalitarian society and create the veneer of freedom and liberty and democracy. That's the way to do it. That's how the pros subjugate their populations. Record oil exports to China at 1.83 million barrels per day from June 1st to June 20th. That's from Iran to China. Iran has also signed a major military deal with China. 40 J-10 jets. I believe that's an older Gen 4, possibly Gen 5, but I think it's a Gen 4 fighter jet. It's probably going to be a while till they get those. Whether or not they're going to be able to actually use them effectively for many years is unknown. They'll likely need sheep-dipped Chinese pilots masquerading as Iranian pilots in order to fly them. And that, quite frankly, might be the experience China is willing to get. They might be willing to permit some of their pilots to be exposed to the hostilities in the Middle East in order to gather intelligence and see whether or not these J-10s are going to be able to perform against what really is the best the West has to offer. That's what we're seeing in the Middle East, okay? They can't use that in Russia, otherwise it would be immediate thermonuclear war. Israel admits that Iran's enriched uranium was not fully destroyed. In fact, they've now gone from obliterated, Hegseth used the word decimated, and now I'm hearing that they've basically just entombed. So obliterated, decimated, entombed. So yeah, that's what's going on. Now, there are warmongers who are exploiting the fact that these facilities were not destroyed. Okay, so this is where the anti-Trump and Trump derangement of CNN actually is serving the interests of the neocons in that it's giving them a potential license to go in again. But I'll tell you what the real scary thing is with what we just seen, okay, with this B-2 stealth bomber Midnight Hammer display. It's that we use the best of the best. We use the best of everything we possibly had, and we probably didn't even destroy the facility. Now, what that means is that once conventional weaponry has exhausted its utility on the battlefield, that is when we move towards non-conventional weapons. So I think that's what's likely going to be next. This ceasefire is basically just a pause. That's all it is. It was initiated by the Israelis and the Americans because they needed to get more air defense systems into Israel, and there have been daily, constant flights nonstop to Israel since the ceasefire started, okay? And this is why the Iranians right now are on such a high state of alert, because they know that the other shoe could drop at any minute, and I think it's going to drop sooner than later. Israeli War Minister Katz ordered new operational plans against Iran. The goals are air superiority and omniscience, halting missile and nuclear programs, punishing terror links, and they're saying that they're going to impose the Lebanon model on Iran. Well, what does that mean? That means more sustained bombardment. That means possible ground infiltration in certain places. That seems crazy, I know, but that's what we may likely see. We could see more decapitation strikes, more fifth-generation warfare, of course, just with propaganda, and more hybrid warfare and assassinations and things of that nature. According to Axios, enriched uranium sealed off deep tunnels in post-bombings. So basically, we've went from obliterated, decimated to, well, we sealed it off, at least. U.S. Senator Coons warns of likely renewed U.S. military involvement, and the war with Iran, the 12-day war, some call it an 11-day war, cost the United States $800 million and 20% of its THAAD missile defense systems. Guys, I want to let you know that we have a warehouse. This is CanadianPreparedness.com for the time being. Anyways, we're doing a little bit of restructuring, and we're having a Canada Day / 4th of July Day to celebrate, the creation of the country's confederacy and of course, July the 4th. 15% off store-wide. Use coupon code Canada15. Go through the link in the description. Okay, now that that's out of the way, the Senate has rejected the Iranian War Powers Resolution boosting Trump's freedom of military action. So, of course, now the stage is set for Trump to do whatever he wants with Iran, okay? So they're just waiting either for that false flag attack, which I'm not entirely convinced they need. Ray McGovern was on the channel the other day. He thinks that we're going to see another Gulf of Tonkin-style incident where the Nimitz, which is supposed to be decommissioned next year, which is a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, could potentially be what is targeted in quite possibly a false flag attack. Do they even need that at this point in time? We all know they initiated these hostilities without any real impetus. There was no false flag. There was no deciding or defining event that was required, it seemed, in order for them to take this next step. They just did it. So will they just do it again? Probably. But if they have that Nimitz carrier sink, and it's a major radiological catastrophe in the Gulf of Oman or the Persian Gulf, then that most certainly will be what likely pushes us into a whole new realm of trying to utilize patriotic invocations to mobilize for massive widespread war in the Middle East. Trump's terminating trade talks with Canada. The Golden Dome system is expected to cost $175 billion. It'll cost way more than that. That's going to include SpaceX, Palantir, and Anduril may lead in the development. Yes, folks, Palantir is most certainly Skynet. NATO summit reveals authoritarian trend, elite enrichment and social cuts to fund war. They're talking about 5% across the board. Meanwhile, you're seeing the Putin and Trump administrations still pretending like they're best of friends. And Putin is going to try to string Trump along and stroke his ego at every step of the way. Make no mistake about it. When Trump is trying to ensure that NATO spends 5% of its GDP on war. They're doing that for Russia. That is not in the interests of Russia. Meanwhile, Russia is claiming that they're going to be cutting their military expenditures, but they're pretty secretive and they don't need to disclose anything. They can disclose whatever they want. So I highly doubt that if NATO is upping its military spend to 5%, that the Russians are going to be reducing their military spend unless the war in Ukraine ceases, which it most certainly is not, for reasons that we're going to get into in just a moment. According to Friedrich Merz, the German chancellor, we must bring back conscription. And this is all, of course, due to fear with an imminent war with Russia. We're talking about the Baltic states getting F-35s, which could be armed with nuclear weapons. The same F-35s armed with nuclear weapons that they have in the UK and Finland, currently hiding in Cold War-era bunkers. According to the Bundestag, France or the UK should provide Germany with direct access to their nuclear weapons. I highly doubt that's going to happen because there's a bit of history between those two countries. But I think what they're saying here is that we need nukes too, not just the American tactical B-61 nukes that we currently have that, of course, the Americans control. We want our own nuclear weapons. What could possibly go wrong? Ukraine is preparing contracts for tens of thousands of long-range drones, as per the defense minister Umerov. These are going to be the drones that they use to fire all throughout Russia on all of the soft targets. They plan to increase operations on Russian territory. You still have the P-8A Poseidon plane, the U.S. Navy plane, the MAN plane flying right across from Sochi. You can probably see it from the plane operating around the clock around Crimea. North Korean troops may join the Russian summer offensive. Well, as far as I know, summer is in full swing, so they better start soon before the rainy season begins. Australia is deploying 100 soldiers plus aircraft to Europe to support Ukraine. And NATO is, like I indicated, raising military spend to 5% of GDP, doubling the total to $2.8 trillion by the 2030s. Germany calls for a return of conscription. Some officials seek nuclear sharing, blah, 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 blah. NATO militarization amid economic crisis sparks fears of World War III. We're already in World War III. Let's stop saying sparking fears of World War III. We're in it. Now, here's the Iranian foreign minister's response, and I will conclude with this because I got better things to do, and so do you. Here's his response to Trump's attacks on the Ayatollah and posting of various memes like Bomb Iran, which is a parody of Barbaran. The Beach Boys song. Great song, by the way. The Beach Boys version, that is. The complexity and tenacity of Iranians is famously known on our magnificent carpets woven through countless hours of hard work and patience. But as a people, yeah, I don't know if that's the analogy that I would have used with the technologically sophisticated West. But as a people, our basic premise is very simple and straightforward. We know our worth, value, and independence. We will never allow anyone else to decide our destiny. And this is part of the reason why they don't want the Russian S-400 system, because they're afraid that the Russians are not going to push the button and allow them to turn it on, just like they wouldn't allow them to turn it on in Syria. The Russians had S-400 in Syria, and they allowed the Israeli planes to fly around with impunity. Now, of course, if you're Iran looking at this, do you want your sovereignty in the hands of somebody who has a Israeli lobby in their own country, which is on par with the one that we have in the United States? Probably not. So if anybody's asking why do the Russians or why do the Iranians don't want the Russians' help, that probably has something to do with it, which is why their defense minister recently went to China to see what they could get. But as a people, our basic premise is straightforward and simple. We know our worth, value, and independence. We will never allow anyone else to decide our destiny. If President Trump is genuine about wanting a deal, he should put aside the disrespectful attitude. And why is he even talking in this way? Like, trying to reprimand Trump is utterly pointless at this point in time. Save your breath, bro. The decision has been made. You're not going to win with sanctimony with these people. They care about one thing, and it's about total dominion and power over the Middle East, and they're going to get it by hook or by crook. And the sooner you understand that, I get that you have to temporize a little bit with this diplomatic style language, show the international community, and I think this is really all this is for. This has nothing to do with Trump anyways. The great and powerful Iranian people who showed the world that the Israeli regime had no choice but to run to daddy to avoid being flattened by our missiles, not so sure about that. You see, the people who are of the belief that the reason why the Israelis and the Americans stopped because Iran was kicking their ass are entirely delusional, okay? Yes, it's true they were running out of interceptors, but these are the kind of people who, you know, if they break a fingernail, they don't want to fight a war. So for that reason, they wanted to ensure that they had an ample stockpile of stuff because they realized that this is going to be a much longer campaign. That doesn't mean you won. In fact, it's in your best interest to always be paranoid and act as though you're losing if you want to win at anything. That is why the West has been so successful in its imperialist pursuits, because it always is that paranoid that it believes that it could lose it all at any moment, even when it has full spectrum control over everything. If illusions lead to worse mistakes, Iran will not hesitate to unveil its real capabilities, which will certainly end any delusion about the power of Iran. Okay, all I have to say is, where were those capabilities when they took out your entire upper echelon of your military leadership and you were on the brink of potentially falling apart? Why didn't you use those then? Perhaps that would have established deterrence. You know, like, it makes no sense to make these threats and never act upon it. In fact, it actually backfires because that means you're all talk. And I'm not saying you are. I'm not saying you don't have these capabilities, but there was a time to use them, and you had the casus belli to use them after that attack was made. It should have been instantaneous. It should have been full spectrum. You should have fired everything you could have possibly had. Then they might have taken you seriously and you would have bought yourself more time. Instead, you're doing this time release thing where you truly, genuinely believe that you're going to be able to negotiate with these people. You're not. Okay, they have a plan. And you're not in that plan. So that's, you know, until the Iranian leadership realizes that, they're going to be screwed. Iran will not hesitate to unveil its real capabilities, which will certainly end in caps. That's the only word that is capitalized, with the exception of no choice and run. End any delusion about the power of Iran. Good will begets good, and good will begets goodwill, and respect begets respect. At this point in time, you know, there comes a certain point in time where you just have to have a divorce, right? Where saying sorry is insufficient. And I would say, if I was Iran, that nothing the Israelis in the United States could say at this point to make me ever want to negotiate again, unless they made real concessions, okay? And I'm just saying, from the objective point of view of the Iranians, they have stepped over every possible line. So for you to leave this door open makes you a simp. It really does. It ultimately really does. And so you have to just either draw the line and don't even say anything. Just stop saying shit and just do shit. You know, don't talk, just shoot, as the good, bad, and the ugly would say. Anyways, guys, I got to get rolling here. Go and check out our interview with Liron Shapira yesterday, an AI expert. I love having conversations like that are not just strictly ado with geopolitics, because my mind, I have an interest in all of these other topics that I don't typically discuss on the channel. For me personally, that was one of my favorite conversations that I've had this year. So go and check it out. We also are releasing videos on Canadian Prepper this week. We've been talking about how to get bees, how to get your beehive started, how to, you know, produce honey as just either a hobby or for post-apocalyptic preparedness or off-grid preparedness. We're also releasing a video today on how to use various signage and sign language in disaster situations. You might find yourself in a survival situation where you can't communicate loudly, and you need to be able to communicate in stealth but visually. And so we give you some tips. We talk about various military tactical signage, as well as ASL style signage, and numerous other ways that you can communicate non-verbally on the low. What else do we got this week? We got a lot of stuff coming out, so just stay tuned. And once again, if you want to gear up at Canadian Preparedness, use coupon code Canada, all caps 15% off store-wide. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care.